A well-known argument about sex differences goes something like this. Unlike men, women have hormones that fluctuate, and due to those hormone fluctuations, women have something called emotions. These emotions are generally considered to be bad, which is why we make memes about how stupid emotional women are, and we make jokes about how a woman can never be president of the United States because her emotions would lead her to drop a nuclear bomb on somebody for no reason, unlike something a man would do. And those jokes, of course, go on to reinforce our idea that women simply cannot be trusted in positions of authority, which may have real-life consequences. These stereotypes also have an important impact on scientific research, since for decades, women and also non-human female animals were excluded from biomedical studies due to a fear that female mammals are more variable, mostly thanks to those pesky hormones. That means that a significant portion of our scientific knowledge base doesn't actually tell us about human nature or human brains, but about male nature and male brains, which in some cases could be quite important due to the fact that, yes, there are actual differences that we can see on a population level between men and women, and that can be significant. That's why researchers at University of Michigan wanted to look at whether or not it's true that women are simply more emotional than men, to the point that it's worth controlling for those emotional swings in research environments. Sure enough, in a study published this month in Scientific Reports, men and women were actually more alike than they were different in how their emotional states varied over the course of 75 days. So yeah, it turns out we've been discriminating against women in scientific research for absolutely no reason. I'm shocked. By the way, I'm going to be talking a lot about men and women in this video. Just to be clear and to save time, in this video, when I use those words, I'm referring to cis men and cis women, which is to say men who are assigned male at birth and identify as male as adults, and women who are assigned female at birth and identify as female as adults. Okay, so a few things to note about this study. For a start, it's kind of a small sample size. It's not too bad. It's 142 total participants, but only 30 of those were men. That's because the other 112 were split up into groups, like women with regular menstrual cycles who were not on any oral contraceptives, or women who were on one of 3 different oral contraceptives. And they did that because those pills are, they obviously affect your hormones. And so there's a hypothesis that some oral contraceptives may also help some women regulate their emotional state. So it's not the biggest sample size, meaning that there's a chance that there is a difference between men and women in this respect, but it's so small that they just didn't have enough subjects to be able to notice it. The other issue is that the subjects are weird. Not like weird, like they're not out there like loving candy corn and collecting their toenails in jars, but they're weird as in Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. This is one of those common issues we see in American and European studies particularly, where most of the subjects are just white college kids who show up to a study to get $15 or course credit. Finally, there's the issue of how do you scientifically evaluate someone's emotional state? That's a tough one because you can take all kinds of measurements of like a person's sweat or their pulse or brain scans. But unfortunately, the most accurate way to know how someone is feeling is to just ask them and give them no reason to lie to you. So the researchers had the subjects fill out a survey every evening before bed. That survey was the Positive and Negative Affect Schedule, PANAS. PANAS. which has been widely used in investigations of inter-individual variability and employed in recent investigations of intra-individual variability. Participants rated the extent to which they experienced 10 positive effect items, like happy, proud, and 10 negative effect items, like irritable and afraid. In the past 24 hours on a 5-point scale from 1 equals very slight, not at all, to 5 extremely. Daily composites were created by averaging across positive and negative affect items, respectively. And yeah, they found that men and women experienced a very similar array of emotions across the entire 75-day study, which would include at least 2 regular menstrual cycles. That might be surprising to you, because if we take that result on its face, does that mean that the idea of PMS is a myth? Because I have absolutely had like weird crying jags that I later realize occurred right before my period. And I'm like, oh, well, that's probably what that was. So was that just a coincidence? Do hormones really just not affect emotions that much? Well, no, that's not necessarily what this means. There are a few different options that we can go with if this study is true. For instance, maybe hormone fluctuations don't really matter that much to your emotional state in the grand scheme of things. Or maybe men experience hormonal shifts at about the same rate as women. The idea of a male menstrual cycle has been around for decades. Cis men don't necessarily produce eggs and then, need to flush those eggs out with their uterine lining, obviously. And that would be a very hard to miss clue that there's roughly a 28-day cycle happening in your body. But contrary to popular belief, or maybe just like 4chan belief, men do have hormones. Testosterone is the obvious one, but they do also have estrogen and progesterone, just in smaller amounts compared to women, the same way that women tend to have testosterone, just in smaller amounts compared to men. And while some people have argued that men's hormones might ebb and flow on a monthly cycle, just like women, there's not a ton of evidence for that. There is some evidence that it might change seasonally, but that evidence is spotty and difficult to replicate. For instance, a Baylor University meta-analysis done in 2013 found that current research suggests that while some evidence exists to support the notion of seasonal testosterone variations, the discussed inconsistencies preclude the incorporation of this concept into current clinical standards. It's tricky to figure out, especially due to all the other things that also change seasonally and can also change your hormone levels. Things like how much you exercise and what your body weight is like and your body composition. However, what is an accepted fact is that men experience hormonal cycles that are fairly standard over the course of a single day. For the most part, men's testosterone levels are highest when they first wake up in the morning, and as the day goes on, those levels drop, reaching their nadir at night right before bed. Lifestyle can greatly affect that trend, though, as those levels can change based, again, on exercise, diet, sexual activity, and even stress. So it's certainly possible that women do get a little more emotionally volatile at a certain point every month or so, but that men get a little more emotionally volatile at a certain point every day or so. And in the end, it all just kind of evens out. I would love to see this study replicated with more participants, because while we can spend all day guessing about this, about whether or not there's really that much of a difference between men and women in terms of emotional regulation, we need more data to know if there is any difference at all, even a slight one. Also, it's worth pointing out that there are 2 important aspects to our emotions. What we feel inside, and then how or if we express that feeling. Feminists have long argued that one way patriarchy harms men is that we as a society mock and humiliate boys for expressing certain emotions like sadness, fear, or even love, while allowing and sometimes even rewarding the expression of emotions like anger or pride or lust. We end up with men who, say, experience a loss thanks to happenstance, and they can't just grieve that loss. Like, say your mom dies of cancer. You can't just be sad. You can't just cry and try to move on. You have all these emotions, and the only outlet that seems appropriate for you is anger. Punch a wall, shout at a doctor, kick a dog. None of that's going to help, but you haven't been given the tools to react in a psychologically healthy way because you've grown up thinking emotions are bad and punching a wall isn't emotion. Anger doesn't count as an emotion. Being horny doesn't count as an emotion. Being boastful about your accomplishments doesn't count. Emotions are bad things like crying. Emotions are for girls. Throwing the Xbox controller through the television is for boys. Everybody loses in this situation. It's bad for men, and it's bad for the women who have to deal with being the eventual target of these not emotions. I swear, as a woman who has dated a lot of men, even the good ones could have benefited from looking at a goddamn feelings wheel every now and again in order to process what they are actually feeling. Hell, I can benefit from sometimes looking at a feelings wheel, and I'm of the gender that is allowed to cry. Hopefully, this study is just one more step towards building a base of scientific knowledge that's more accurate than what we currently have, because it both acknowledges the actual potential differences between men and women, while also doing away with those stereotypes that artificially inflate those differences and lead to incomplete scientific knowledge.